Hello and welcome to our channel. Tonight, we travel to 19th century Germany, to a quiet city square on a sunny afternoon. But our story is not one of political intrigue or military conquest. It is a story that begins with a single baffling figure. A young man who seemed to stumble into the modern world as if from another planet, or from a forgotten tomb. He was a blank slate, a human question mark, whose sudden appearance would ignite a firestorm of curiosity, compassion, and deadly conspiracy across Europe. He became known as the Child of Europe, a living experiment for philosophers and educators, a cause célèbre for kings and noblemen. But his story is not a fairy tale. It is a dark, tragic mystery, a tale of profound isolation, a suspected royal plot, and ultimately, an unsolved murder. This is the story of Caspar Hauser. Imagine a young man about 16 years old, appearing as if from nowhere. He can barely walk, his legs unsteady as if they have never known their function. He can speak only a few garbled phrases. His eyes, accustomed to darkness, are pained by the light of day. He carries a letter that claims he has been kept in a dark cell, alone, since he was a small child, never seeing another human face, never hearing a human voice. Who was he? Was he, as the letter claimed, a poor boy abandoned by his mother? Or was he, as many came to suspect, the rightful heir to a royal throne, the victim of a dynastic plot to erase him from existence? His short, tragic life would be a desperate search for his own identity, a search that would lead him from the darkness of a dungeon to the glittering salons of high society, and finally to a fatal encounter with an assassin's dagger in a quiet park. Tonight, we will piece together the puzzle of Caspar Hauser. We will examine his strange appearance in Nuremberg, his remarkable journey of learning, the clues that pointed towards a royal connection, and the mysterious attempts on his life that culminated in his unsolved murder. Was he a genuine feral child, a lost prince, or a cunning impostor? This is a story that continues to haunt German history, a profound and deeply human mystery that asks fundamental questions about identity, memory, and the darkness that can lie hidden behind the gilded facade of power. So settle in as we step back in time and meet the boy who fell to earth. Our story begins on Whit Monday, May 26, 1828, in the ancient city of Nuremberg, in the German kingdom of Bavaria. Nuremberg was a city steeped in history, a place of high-gabled houses, cobblestone streets, and the imposing Nuremberg castle looming over the town. It was a city of order, tradition, and respectable church-going citizens. The scene on this particular afternoon was one of peaceful, holiday lethargy. Strolling through an unremarkable square known as the Unschlittplatz was a local shoemaker named George Weichmann. It was then that he saw him. Leaning against a wall was a young man, or perhaps a boy, dressed in a strange and shabby collection of clothes that seemed to belong to a peasant. He was swaying on his feet, his posture awkward, his gaze vacant. He seemed disoriented and in distress. Weichmann, a good citizen, approached the boy and asked him what he was doing. The boy did not respond with words. Instead, he simply held out a small sealed envelope that he had been clutching in his hand. The envelope was addressed to the captain of the 4th Squadron of the 6th Cavalry Regiment. The boy himself could only utter a few repeated phrases in a thick, barely intelligible Bavarian dialect. He would say, "I want to be a rider like my father was, and don't know." These, it seemed, were the limits of his vocabulary. Intrigued and concerned, Weichmann decided to take the boy to the addressee of the letter, a Captain von Wesnig. The journey through the streets of Nuremberg was a strange spectacle. The boy walked with a bizarre lurching gait, like a toddler first learning to stand. He seemed to be in physical pain, crying out as his feet, unaccustomed to hard shoes and cobblestones, became sore and blistered. He seemed overwhelmed by the sights and sounds of the city, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and wonder, like a wild animal brought into a crowded room. When they finally reached Captain von Wesnig's house, the captain was not at home. The boy was left with the servants, who offered him food and drink. He spat out the beer and roasted meat they gave him, showing a violent aversion to everything except plain black bread and water, which he consumed greedily. He was eventually taken to the local police station and placed in a cell, more for his own protection than for any crime. The authorities of Nuremberg were now faced with a complete enigma. A young man with the vocabulary of a toddler, the gait of an infant, and no knowledge of who he was or where he came from. His only clue was the letter he carried. The letter was actually two letters, one tucked inside the other. The first, the outer letter, was written in a crude hand and appeared to be from a poor laborer. It was dated from the Bavarian border, the year 1828. It stated that the boy had been left in the writer's care as an infant in 1812. The writer claimed he was a poor day laborer with 10 children of his own, and could no longer afford to keep the boy. He said he had taught the boy to read and write, but had never let him take a single step out of my house. The letter concluded by saying that the boy wanted to become a soldier, and the captain could either take him in or hang him. Tucked inside this was a second, much older and more elegant letter, written in a different hand. This one was purportedly from the boy's mother to the laborer. It was dated October 1812. It claimed the boy's name was Caspar, that he was born on April 30, 1812, and that his father was a deceased cavalryman of the 6th Regiment. It asked the laborer to raise the boy in secret, and when he was 17, to send him to Nuremberg to join his father's old regiment. The letter ended with the poignant and perhaps deceitful plea: "His father is dead." These letters only deepened the mystery. They presented a bizarre and cruel story. A child kept in total isolation for his entire life. But was the story true? The police began to examine the boy himself. He was about 16 or 17 years old, with fair hair and blue eyes. He was in good physical health, but his behavior was profoundly strange. He showed no recognition of everyday objects. He would try to grasp the flame of a candle, showing no understanding of fire. He was fascinated by shiny objects and toy soldiers. His senses seemed both incredibly acute and strangely undeveloped. The smell of a flower could send him into raptures, while a distant church bell could cause him physical pain. He spent his first days in a cell in the Nuremberg city jail, in the care of a jailer named Andreas Hiltel. Hiltel and his family were kind to the boy. They observed him closely. They noted that his feet were soft like an infant's, with no calluses, as if he had never worn shoes or walked any significant distance. He seemed to see perfectly well in the dark but was pained by daylight. And he subsisted only on a diet of black bread and water. Under the patient tutelage of Hiltel and other curious visitors, Caspar began to learn. And his progress was astonishing. Within a few weeks he could speak in simple sentences and write his own name. And as his ability to communicate grew, he began to tell his own story, a story far more horrifying than even the strange letters had suggested. Caspar's memory was fragmented, a collection of sensory impressions rather than a coherent narrative. He described his entire life, as far as he could remember, as having been spent in a small dark cell, perhaps no bigger than a large closet. He said he always sat on a straw pallet on the floor. He never saw the sun, never heard a human voice, a bird song, or the sound of the wind. His only companions were two small, carved wooden horses. His food, always just bread and water, would appear beside him while he slept. He claimed that sometimes his water had a bitter taste, and after drinking it, he would fall into a deep sleep, deeper than usual. When he awoke, his straw would have been changed, and his hair and nails trimmed. He had no concept of time of day or night. He only knew existence in the dark, silent solitude. Then, shortly before his appearance in Nuremberg, everything changed. A man appeared. Caspar said he had never seen this man's face. as the man was always careful to stay behind him or to come when it was too dark to see. This man, as Caspar called him, began to teach him. He taught him to stand and to walk, a painful process that made Caspar cry out. He taught him to write his name, Caspar Hauser, and he taught him the few phrases he knew upon his arrival. I want to be a writer like my father was, and don't know. Finally, the man dressed him in the strange peasant clothes and led him out of the darkness. Caspar described the overwhelming, painful experience of seeing daylight for the first time. The man guided his stumbling steps for what seemed like a long time, and then finally placed the letter in his hand, pointed towards the city of Nuremberg, and vanished, leaving Caspar alone to be discovered. This was Caspar's story. It was a tale of unimaginable cruelty, of a human being raised in a state of almost total sensory deprivation. The story caused a sensation. The case of Caspar Hauser became a Europe-wide phenomenon. He was a living feral child, not raised by wolves but by darkness and silence. He became a focal point for the great philosophical and scientific debates of the age. Was human nature innate, or was it a product of society and education? Caspar, the blank slate, was seen as a living experiment who could provide the answers. He was moved from the jail and became the ward of the city of Nuremberg. He was placed in the care of a kind and intelligent schoolmaster named George Friedrich Daumer. Daumer took on the immense task of educating Caspar, of teaching him not just language and facts, but what it meant to be human in the world. Under Daumer's care, Caspar blossomed. He showed a remarkable intelligence, a gentle and affectionate nature, and an almost painful sensitivity. He learned to speak, read, and write with incredible speed. He developed a talent for drawing, but he remained in many ways childlike. He was naive, trusting, and had no understanding of social conventions or deceit. He was a man with the mind of a genius and the soul of an infant. It was during this time with Daumer that the first hints of a more sinister and high-stakes backstory began to emerge. As Caspar's memory developed, he recalled more details. He remembered that his wooden horses had been given to him by the same man, who later taught him to walk. He began to have vague, dreamlike recollections of a time before the dark cell, flashes of a large room, a beautiful woman, and a coat of arms. This is when the rumors of a royal connection began. The public and the press, fascinated by the mystery, started to speculate. Who would have the motive and the means to perpetrate such a bizarre and elaborate crime? A poor laborer, as the letter claimed? Seemed unlikely. This was a plot that required resources, patience, and a powerful reason to hide a child away for 16 years. The finger of suspicion began to point towards the highest levels of society, towards the royal house of the Grand Duchy of Baden. The theory, which became known as the Prince of Baden theory, was complex, a story of dynastic ambition and a mother's grief. It went like this: in 1812, the same year Caspar was born, a male heir was born to the Grand Duke Karl of Baden and his wife, Stephanie de Beauharnais, an adopted daughter of Napoleon Bonaparte. The baby prince was healthy at birth, but then just a few days later, he suddenly and mysteriously died. The official cause was given as a sudden illness. A second son born years later also died in infancy. With no direct male heirs, the line of succession for the throne of Baden was set to pass to a morganatic branch of the family, the children of a previous Grand Duke and a lower-ranking noblewoman. The theory proposed that the baby prince of 1812 did not die. Instead, he was kidnapped from his cradle and replaced with the dying or already dead infant. The real prince was then spirited away and given to a keeper, to be raised in secret, hidden from the world, to clear the way for the other branch of the family to inherit the throne. The mastermind of this plot was supposedly the Countess von Hochberg, the morganatic wife who stood to gain everything if her own sons became the heirs. And the kidnapped prince, the theory concluded, was Caspar Hauser. This theory, though it sounds like the plot of a romance novel, was taken very seriously. It seemed to explain everything. It provided a powerful motive for the crime. It explained the resources needed to keep a child imprisoned for so long. It explained the vague memories of a grand room and a noble lady that Caspar was beginning to have. As this theory gained traction, the story of Caspar Hauser took a dark and violent turn. He was no longer just a scientific curiosity. He was now a political threat. If he was indeed the rightful heir to the throne of Baden, his existence was a danger to the ruling family. On October 17, 1829, while still living with Daumer, the first attempt on his life was made. Caspar was found bleeding in the cellar of the house, with a deep cut on his forehead. He claimed that a masked man had attacked him with a cleaver, saying, "You must die before you leave the city of Nuremberg." Caspar fought him off and the attacker fled. The police were skeptical. They could find no footprints, no sign of the attacker. Some began to whisper that Caspar, craving attention, had inflicted the wound on himself. But Daumer and others who knew him well believed him. They saw the terror in his eyes. After the attack, Caspar's security was increased. He was eventually moved from Daumer's care and placed with a series of other guardians. His life became more public and also more complicated. Some of his new guardians found him difficult, and the initial public wave of sympathy began to wane. A British nobleman, Lord Stanhope, took a particular interest in the case. He effectively adopted Caspar, spending lavishly on him and promising to take him to England. Stanhope funded investigations to prove Caspar's royal lineage, traveling to Hungary to chase down leads. But then, his attitude towards Caspar suddenly and inexplicably changed. He began to publicly accuse Caspar of being an impostor and a liar, and he abruptly abandoned him. Caspar was left in the care of another schoolmaster, Johann Georg Meyer, in the small town of Ansbach. His life in Ansbach was not a happy one. Meyer was a strict, pedantic man who did not believe Caspar's story and treated him with suspicion. Caspar became increasingly isolated and depressed. He knew that powerful people considered him a fraud, while others considered him a threat. He was a man caught between two worlds belonging to neither. And it was here in Ansbach that the final tragic act of his life would play out. On the afternoon of December 14, 1833, Caspar stumbled into Meyer's house, pale and clutching his side. He was seriously wounded. He managed to gasp out that he had been lured to the local court garden, the Hofgarten, with a promise of new information about his origins. He said that a man had been waiting for him. The man had handed him a small purple bag, and then, as Caspar reached for it, had stabbed him deeply in the chest with a dagger before fleeing. Caspar led his guardians back to the garden, where they found the purple silk purse. Inside there was no great secret, only a small note, written in a cryptic mirrored script. The note read, in German, "Hauser will be able to tell you quite precisely how I look and where I am from. To save Hauser the trouble, I want to tell you myself where I come from. I come from the Bavarian border, on the river. I will even tell you the name M.L. Oh. This note was as baffling as everything else in his life. Was it a genuine clue left by the killer? Or was it, as the skeptics immediately claimed, planted by Caspar himself to stage another, more dramatic attack and regain public sympathy? Caspar was taken home, his condition rapidly deteriorating. The wound was deep, penetrating his lung and liver. A local doctor was called, but the medical care was tragically inept. For 3 days, Caspar lingered in agony. He repeated his story of the attack consistently to everyone who would listen. His last words were reportedly, "Tired, very tired. The journey is long." On December 17, 1833, Caspar Hauser died of his wound. He was just 21 years old. His death did not solve the mystery. It only deepened it, transforming it from a strange case of a feral child into an unsolved murder. The question now was not just who was Caspar Hauser, but who killed him and why. The Ansbach police, led by a man named Baron von Rumpler, conducted an investigation that was, by most accounts, deeply flawed. From the very beginning, they seemed determined to prove that Caspar had stabbed himself. They argued that the wound was self-inflicted, a desperate cry for attention that had accidentally gone too deep. They pointed to the lack of footprints from an assailant in the snowy garden, and the strange, almost nonsensical nature of the note in the purse. The official verdict was that Caspar Hauser had committed suicide, or had died by accidentally stabbing himself. But this official narrative was, and is, full of holes. The doctors who performed the autopsy were convinced that the deep, powerful blow could not have been self-inflicted. The angle of the wound was wrong, and Caspar's own character, as described by those who knew him best, was gentle and timid, not prone to such violent self-harm. Those who believed in the Prince of Baden theory saw a much darker story. They believed Caspar was assassinated. He was killed by an agent of the House of Baden to silence him forever, to ensure that the secret of the stolen prince would die with him. The attack was real. The note was a deliberate red herring, designed to cast suspicion on Caspar himself. The flawed police investigation, they argued, was not a result of incompetence, but of a high-level cover-up, an effort to protect a powerful royal family. And so, the two competing narratives of Caspar Hauser's life were set in stone. On one side we have the impostor theory. This theory posits that Caspar was a clever fraud from the very beginning. He was not a feral child, but a young peasant runaway with a talent for mimicry. He concocted the entire story of imprisonment, perhaps with the help of an accomplice, to escape a life of poverty and gain fame and fortune. In this view, his initial strange behavior was an act. His learning was not so remarkable, as he was simply remembering things he already knew. The attacks on his life were staged by him to maintain public interest, and his final fatal wound was a theatrical gesture that went tragically wrong. The supporters of this theory point to inconsistencies in his story and the skepticism of some of his later guardians, like Lord Stanhope and Meyer. On the other side we have the prince theory. This theory accepts Caspar's story of imprisonment as true and sees him as the legitimate, hereditary Prince of Baden. His strange behavior was the genuine result of his cruel upbringing. His learning was a testament to his innate intelligence. The attempts on his life were real assassination attempts by agents of the usurping Baden family, and his murder was the final successful attempt to silence him. The supporters of this theory point to his gentle nature, the physical evidence of the autopsy, and the powerful motive that the House of Baden had for wanting him dead. For over a century and a half the debate has raged. In the 20th century, new scientific tools were brought to bear on the mystery. In 1996, a bloodstain on the trousers that Caspar was believed to have been wearing when he was attacked was subjected to DNA analysis. The DNA from the bloodstain was compared to the DNA of two living female descendants of the Baden family. The result was inconclusive but suggestive. The mitochondrial DNA did not match. This was widely reported as proof that Caspar was not the Prince of Baden. However, the authenticity of the trousers was questioned. Were they really the ones he was wearing? The chain of custody over 160 years was uncertain. Then, in 2002, a second, more rigorous DNA test was conducted. This time, scientists used genetic material from multiple sources, including a lock of Caspar's hair and sweat from his hatband. They compared this DNA to that of Astrid von Mettinger, a descendant from the female line of the House of Baden. The results of this second test were stunning. The scientists announced that the DNA sequences were not contradictory. In other words, the genetic evidence was consistent with Caspar Hauser being a legitimate member of the Baden family. This DNA evidence has reignited the debate, lending powerful scientific weight to the romantic theory of the lost prince. It suggests that the fantastic story may in fact be true. So, who was Caspar Hauser? The evidence, even with modern science, remains tantalizingly incomplete. We are left with a ghost, a tragic figure defined by what was taken from him. A name, a family, a childhood, and ultimately his life. He remains a powerful and unsettling symbol. He is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. A boy who learned to love and trust after knowing only darkness. And he is a chilling reminder of the depths of human cruelty and the corrupting influence of power. The inscription on his gravestone in Ansbach reads in Latin, "Here lies Caspar Hauser, enigma of his time. His birth was unknown, his death mysterious." That simple epitaph remains as true today as it was in 1833. The child of Europe still keeps his secrets. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the dark and tragic mystery of Caspar Hauser. His story is a unique and haunting chapter in German history, a case that combines the elements of a feral child story, a royal conspiracy, and an unsolved murder. If this exploration of one of history's most famous and enigmatic figures has captured your imagination, please consider supporting our channel. Liking this audio, subscribing, and clicking the notification bell is the best way to help us continue to investigate these profound historical mysteries. Now we open the case to you, our jury. Having heard the evidence from the letters he carried to the modern DNA analysis, what is your verdict on Caspar Hauser? Do you believe he was a cunning impostor who staged his own attacks? Or do you believe he was the lost Prince of Baden, silenced by an assassin's blade? What do you make of the cryptic note found in the purse? We would be fascinated to read your own theories and conclusions in the comments section below. The story of Caspar Hauser forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about the stories we choose to believe and the nature of identity itself. Was he defined by his birth or by his experience? We may never know his true name, but we will never forget his story. Until next time, sleep well.